Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. As we get started, I would love to know where you guys are joining us from. I think Janavi already typed in the chat, greetings from India. I'm very curious to see what other countries we have represented in this room. All right, we also have Zambia. Great. Welcome so much, guys. Hi, Nadia, Sri Lanka, Malawi, Nepal, South Africa. I'm speaking from Brazil. We have another person from Malawi, Czech Republic. Great, guys. It's so great to see the diversity in the room, and I'm really happy to see you guys here. As we get started, I would love to invite you guys to open your cameras if that's possible, if your connection allows. I know sometimes it can be tricky. But if your connection allows that, please open your camera so we can feel a little bit closer to each other so that our facilitator today can see your faces as well, see your reactions, see how you guys are doing as we continue with the session. And if you're not able to open your cameras, you can see that Zoom has a reactions option. So if you hover your mouse a little bit on the bottom, you will see a button saying reactions, and there's like different emojis there. If you can't open your camera, feel free to use those to let us know how the workshop is going for you. So whenever you agree with something, whenever you like something that has been said, please use the emojis there, and feel free to use the chat as much as you want as well. We're going to be keeping an eye on it too, so nothing that you say will go without us noticing. So please use the chat as much as you want. And without further ado, I'm very happy to welcome you guys to the first day of this workshop that Global Changemakers is hosting with GPODS. Today we have a very, very special facilitator joining us. We have Eeshan joining us from GPODS, and he's going to be conducting the workshop. Feel free to interact as much as you want. I'm sure this is going to be a very informative, thought-provoking session for us as change makers, especially those concerned with climate change and working on environmental issues. So make sure that you use every minute of this workshop and really learn as much as you can. So yeah, thank you so much, guys, for joining. If you need any technical assistance, anything, feel free to message me on the chat as well. I'd be happy to help. And enjoy. Eeshan, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Yasmin, and welcome, everyone. I hope it's been a good morning, afternoon, evening, late in the day for all of you. Let me start by quickly introducing myself. But before I do that, let me thank Yasmin and Srishti, who've been sort of our pillars of strength for organizing this workshop. It's always fascinating to speak with people who are younger than me. It's a little awkward to be speaking about climate change with people who've sort of caused it. So nice to see younger people in the audience today. And again, I just want to echo what Yasmin said. Please feel free to unmute yourself as long as your emoticons are not that of an angry face. I'm happy with emoticons as well. Please put your comments in the chat box, and I'm happy to take those up as well. All right. So a little bit about me before I begin. So I am by qualification an environmental lawyer. I hold a master's in environmental law and policy with a major in climate change and energy policy from Stanford Law School. That was back in the day. Since then, I've worked with the United Nations in various capacities in Geneva, in New York. I then came back to India. I set up my own environmental consulting firm, which deals with climate change impact, compliances, the usual legal boring stuff. But outside of the consultancy, I'm also the assistant dean of India's largest university, where I teach environmental law, water law, sustainability management, ecological economics, a bunch of subjects. And outside of all of this, I am the co-founder of the GPODS Fellowship. Now, what is the GPODS Fellowship? So for those of us who are absolute nerds about everything that happens in the world, you'd probably know that environment does not stop at environment. It then transcends into public policy, it transcends into law, it transcends into international relations, it transcends into your local communities. And GPODS Fellowship is a UN SDG Impact Award nominated fellowship that transcends these structures. So during the 3-month online fellowship, we cover sustainability, public policy, diplomacy as part of our courses. For those of you who are curious, I'm not the most creative person. So GPODS is an acronym for Global Policy, Diplomacy, and Sustainability Fellowship. That's what we do. And within the fellowship, it's actually very cool to get to meet the kind of people you get to meet. So we have a tradition where we have about 50 mentors who are all global leaders. And hopefully one day all of you can be mentors too. And these mentors come and interact with our fellows across the table. They have a guest lecture, they have office hours, they network. And when I say these are global leaders, I literally mean global leaders. So we have Supreme Court judges from around the globe, members of parliament from around the globe. We have UN Assistant Secretary Generals, the head of Convention on Biodiversity, so on and so forth. So the list goes on, a lot of diplomats, a lot of other folks. I request all of you to check out the GPODS website to know more about it. Write to me about it, and I'm happy to clarify any doubts that you might have. All right, so what are we here to do? This is basically a 2-part workshop. Today, I will be discussing the economics of environmental policy, things that we do not consider, and we'll be taking that journey. So when I start my session, I'd request all of your patience, because sometimes my session is a bunch of things coming together and not making sense. But if you're patient enough, it'll all make sense eventually. That's where we'll be answering questions about why environment is not happening. You know, why is everyone talking about environment, but nothing's happening on the ground? And that's some of the things that we'll answer. I'll also be putting a lot of questions to you. You're not supposed to know the right answer, but as long as you're taking calculated guesses, it's absolutely okay. So that's today's session. Tomorrow we'll be discussing game theory in conservation. It's not as complex as it sounds. So we'll be breaking down game theory for you and then applying it to conservation, climate change. Actually, you can apply it to everything that seems like a mental hook or an issue within the public policy domain. So that's what we're looking at through these 2 sessions. Today's session should be about 90 minutes to 100 minutes, somewhere around then. But I assure you it's not going to be boring. I assure you it's going to be fun. That's my responsibility. And tomorrow's session will be exactly at the same time. For those of you who are joining us from South America or the East Coast, I apologize for the timing at which you have to wake up and do this. All right, so let's move on. And let me share my screen really quickly. Okay, so we've covered this bit where I've introduced myself. I have my email ID and the website on the screen. If you need to contact me, please feel free to do that. I'm also known to be annoyingly approachable. So if you guys have any questions or if you have any queries or critiques, all of those are welcome as well. You can mail me or you could message me on LinkedIn. I have a very weird spelling to my name, so I'm easy to find. All right. A couple of things that I'd like to cover. Yasmin sort of already mentioned that the more you interact, the better it is. If you have your videos on, the better it is. I do this for a living, guys. So I do this very often. I'm bored of looking at my own face. So if you can turn on your cameras, that's always better. The other thing that I want all of us to be aware of is that while this is recorded, I want all of us to be able to speak our minds, express our opinions, as long as you're not hurtful towards anyone else. You should feel free to, consider this a safe space where you can talk about things that you want to talk about. Now, finally, I am an environmental lawyer. I am a lawyer eventually. So a couple of disclaimers. My views are mine and not of any of the organizations that I'm on the board of or represent legally or administratively. And I'm trying to take on a big task of explaining something that has been bothering our species for the last millennia, right? So it might be a lot of things that I wish to explain to you, and it's not possible to do justice to 1,000 things. So I'm going to take bits and pieces as examples, a couple of case studies that we're going to take a look at, and I am going to take at the latter part of our session, I'm going to take one city as an example to explain to you how these things pan out in real life. I had the option of choosing, any city in the world because it's the same story all over, but I'm sticking to Mumbai because that's where I have done a lot of my research in the past as well. So of all the things that I mentioned on your slide, I have covered everything. The only thing that I've not put on the slide that I'd like to mention before I go ahead with today's session is this. If any of you have read my publications or my work or attended any of my sessions, you probably know this. I am an absolute sucker for astrophysics. I have zero scientific background. I have no clue how these things work out, but I read everything astrophysics. I listen to everything astrophysics. I still haven't watched the new Don't Look Up movie, but it's on my agenda. So I try and give a lot of examples from my interest, which is astrophysics. I assure you that none of those examples are complicated. If I can understand it, so can you. But that also means I'm not really an expert in astrophysics. So if you have any questions as to why the speed of the meteor is X, Y, Z, I have no clue. So we'll restrict ourselves to environment and climate change, the domain I'm more comfortable with. But the point of having astrophysics is that that's one commonality that all of us observe in our lives, and that's what I try to build on. All right then. So talking of astrophysics. Actually, let me before I begin with the session, I have a task for all of us, and I'm going to list three dates for all of you. And I want to see if you're able to guess what these three dates are, if you can find the commonality amongst these three dates, if any of you can guess what is the significance of these three dates. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to throw out three dates to all of you, and let's see what happens. So the first date is December 30th, 1970. So that's December 30th, 1970. That's date one. The second date is August 18th, 2006. Right? And there are a lot of dates in between. This is not an exhaustive list. The first is December 30th, 1970, August 18, 2006, and then we have July 29, 2020. These are the three dates. Without having to Google, would anyone like to risk a guess as to what is the significance of these three dates? So you're not supposed to know this. This is just trying to make this more interactive right from the beginning. But there's some, if you put your heads to it, the date was almost at the end of the year back in 1970. It was somewhere in the middle in 2006, and a little closer to the start very recently. So we have a guess from Courtney. My guess is dates that global environmental agreements were signed, dates of IPCC reports, but actually that's not a bad guess. I would have, if I were in your place, I would have gone there as well. But it's something that is affected by all of us. It's a lot more common, the reason behind these dates. COP, again, an intelligent guess, very topical, but that's not it. I'm hardly as perceptive as you guys are. All right, we'll give it another 5 seconds and see if anyone wants to take another guess. The three dates are December 30th, 1970, August 18, 2006, July 29, 2020. All right, so every year, International Tiger Day, that's not the one I was looking at, but that's some serious knowledge about international days. The significance of the dates is, and this is where we're getting into the crux of our topic today, the way natural resources are based on our planet there's only so much of the natural resources that we can exploit within 1 year. So believe it or not, there is actual allocation of how many natural resources, how much natural resources you could exploit within a year, within those 365 days. Now, these dates are what we call the Earth Overshoot Day. On December 30th, 1970, a day prior to the end of the year, we extinguished all of the resources that we had budgeted for in that year. In 2006, we exhausted all of the resources for the 365 days that we'd budgeted for on August 18th itself. In 2020, where the whole world came to a standstill, we extinguished all of our resources that were supposed to cover us for the whole of the year, for 365 days, in the first 7 months. So 29th July 2020 is when we extinguished the Earth's biocapacity as human beings. So Earth Overshoot Day is the day on which you finish all the resources that you should have used over 365 days, which means that per year these days, these years, we are using about 1.7 Earths worth of natural resources. Now, the question is that what is that budget for? Why do we have to budget for it? All of those things we're going to discuss. Going back to what I was earlier mentioning, astrophysics, right? So has anyone, if you could raise your hands, if you've heard of this person called Carl Sagan, C-A-R-L-S-A-G-A-N, Carl Sagan? All right, Yasmin has. All right, Martin has too. I think that was a hand. So Carl Sagan was a cosmologist, astrophysicist, who called himself a science educator. He sort of brought science to everyone's lives through TV and radio and all of those things back in the day. But what I'm mentioning him for here is that I love a couple of quotes by him. And I'm going to take you through one specific quote that I'm then going to use for our session today. So this quote goes something like this. If you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. Basically, what he's saying is that if someone tells you, if a friend comes to you and says that, listen, make an apple pie from scratch for me, what you would do is you'd go to the supermarket and you'd get all the ingredients, put them together, bake it, and voila, right? Apple pie in front of you. But if you really have to make it from scratch, you probably need to grow that apple. But let's take a step back. You probably need to plant that seed, but let's take a step back. How do you come up with the elements that make up the seed? How do you come up with soil? So you keep going back, and you end up at the Big Bang. You end up at inventing the universe. So if you have to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. Why am I telling you quotes about astrophysics when we're supposed to discuss climate change here? The reason is that climate change has become cool, and it is imperative that it does become cool so that more and more people jump into this climate action bandwagon and do something about it. But because it has become cool, a lot of us, and there's a huge demand for jobs within the space, a lot of us have sort of zeroed in on one or the other aspect of climate change. So I want to become a climate scientist, and I want to become a climate financier, and I want to become a climate lawyer and engineer and tech and all of those things. But sometimes when we're looking at those larger, longer aims, we forget that it all starts with defining the universe, right? The climate universe needs to be invented for us to understand the more specifics and complex issues of climate finance and carbon markets and so on and so forth. So my task here is to help you invent the climate universe. And in doing so, I'm going to be helping you challenge things that are given to us as facts. So as the status quo, and this is the truth and nothing but the truth, we're going to be challenging those aspects of today's of our environment. That's what we're going to be doing. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, I had the fortune of working with the United Nations for a bit. And while I was in Geneva, one of the projects that I worked on, personal projects that I worked on, was this project where I went through the legal definition of the term environment of 18 countries, including Brazil and some of the countries, Sri Lanka, which I saw in the India, a couple of other countries as well. And I picked up the most prominent words globally that make up the legal definition of the term environment. So the answer to the question, what is the legal definition of environment? Globally, in my research, was this. Typically, globally, environment, the term, includes human beings, water, air, land, other living creatures, plants, microorganism, property, the usual suspects. That's, if I were to ask you, you would have told me the same thing, that trees and animals and plants and water and air, that's what environment is. For some of us who are students of science, you'd probably tell me that biotic plus abiotic is what environment is. But legally, most commonly, environment is defined to include human beings, water, air, land, other living creatures, plants, microorganisms. And property, let's leave property aside. That's a human creation that requires another lecture altogether. But my question to all of you is, in this list of human beings, water, air, land, other living creatures, plants, microorganism, property, is there anything that stands out? Is there a commonality, a common thread that you see flowing through all of these things that make up environment? Or is there something that is intuitively missing, something that should have been included within the legal definition of the term environment, but hasn't? Any thoughts? What do you think is common amongst them all? What do you think is missing? Hi, Bashir. All right. We have a raised hand. You could unmute yourself. Hi, Sibo.
Thank you. I wanted to say that.
Go ahead.
Yes, that's how you pronounce my name.
All right, great.
Thank you. I wanted to say, I think something missing or something to question about talking about the environment, especially with the way the world is looking or going into, is even space. I think it would be something to question as to whether space is the part of the environment or can be considered to be part of our environment, because it's something that we're leading on to, and scientists, they're working on trying to build a habitat to Mars and stuff like that. And when you think about it, the same concepts that we are trying to implement into our own environment, like environment conservation, environment protection and degradation, are the same things that human beings can take out there into space. So it's not really, it's more of a question to say that include things past Earth.
All right. So, Sibo, have you attended any of my sessions earlier? If not, this is the first time I've got the absolute right answer in the first go to my question. So this is exactly what I was looking for, but I had one whole exercise plan to explain to you why it is so. But let's hear from Nadia first. Go ahead, Nadia. You could unmute yourself. And Masanga, you could also. Yes.
Hi, Nadia. Can I go first?
Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll go for commonalities. I think what's common among them all is that human beings, water, air, land, other living creatures are all in one universal space, so to say. We can call it Earth, including interrelationships. I believe everything else is interrelated. All these are interrelated into one whole universe, so to borrow one of the words that you actually mentioned. Yeah, thank you.
All right, so absolutely on point. So there's codependence, interdependence amongst all of these, and if you take out any part of this environmental legal definition puzzle, you lose the whole plot, because water without human beings without water, so on and so forth, these are all interdependent on each other, amongst each other, and you're absolutely right. So the commonality that I was actually looking, Nadia, do you want to go again? If you have any comment.
Hi, no, I'm sorry. The hand raise is an accident and I had a small technical difficulty. Sorry.
All right. Sure, no issues. So as I was saying, the commonality that I want all of you to look at is that the legal definition of the term environment, which is globally accepted, is made up of things that are required by you and I to survive. So human beings are part of the environment, quite obviously, but every other thing that is defined to be a part of the environment is actually that which is required for your sustenance and mine. So water, human beings can't live without. Air, human beings can't live without. Land, human beings can't live without. Other living creatures, human beings can't live without. Plants, microorganism, property. Environment has been defined in a way that it serves humankind, right? And this is the legally accepted definition of environment. So to give you an idea exactly to what Sibo was mentioning, a few years back, I was in London and I was reading the news, and there's this daily called The Sun. I don't know if you've heard of it, but The Sun is one of those, one of the UK's dailies. And I saw this news report in the newspaper. Now it talks about this asteroid. It's called the Psyche 16 asteroid, somewhere between Mars and Jupiter. And the asteroid itself is supposed to contain precious metals worth 8,000 quadrillion pounds. And these include gold and platinum and nickel and iron and whatnot. And then later in the news article, it was said that NASA and, surprise, surprise, SpaceX are planning to go exploring this asteroid at some point of time, with the murmurs, the obvious murmurs, that this exploration might also include mining activities on the asteroid. And why won't you, right? If you're going to a place which has 8,000 quadrillion pounds worth of precious metals, you would want a piece of that, right? Now, my question was that if this sort of precious metal was found on our planet, can you and I just go and mine it and come back and live happily ever after? No, because we have mining laws and we have environmental laws and minor minerals and major minerals and toxic substances and rehabilitation and so many other things that need to be considered. Then why do you not need these compliances for your space exploration? And I know space laws are being developed and tremendous work is being done on that front. But the reason why no environmental law would be applicable if tomorrow you have the resources to go and mine Psyche 16, it's because of this, exactly what Sibo mentioned. None of these terms include anything outside of what is required for your survival. So space is not required for human beings to survive, right? According to our perceptions. So there's nothing about space, there's nothing about sun, moon, any of those things. Because that is not the immediate want, need for us to survive. right? Now, some of you will tell me that, listen, I don't know what's wrong with you. If human beings are defining something, they'll define it according to themselves, right? So if I'm defining this pen, I won't define this pen for what it would mean for a chimpanzee, right? I define it exactly how human beings would want it to be used. So similarly, environment is being defined by human beings, and it's being defined in a way that human beings, everything that human beings require for their survival, air, water, land, plants, microorganism, each of those factors falls within the definition of environment, right? Now, to all of you, I have a couple of other questions. For those of you who are naysayers and you think that human beings should be able to define it however they wish, these are a couple of questions that I have for you. And I'm very considerate in the fact that I understand that not all of you are from a scientific background. So I've put a periodic table in front of you so that you could take your guesses. So my question to all of you is this: which are the 5 most prominent, abundant, commonly available elements in the universe? Which are the 5 most commonly abundant elements in the universe? The periodic table is in front of you. I do not expect you to know the right answer. Any guesses are fine too. Some are very obvious. What do you guys think? 5 most prominent elements in the universe. Hydrogen, absolutely. Hydrogen is number 1. Suchika, you're absolutely on point. Let's hear from Sibo. Courtney has guessed it right as well. Yeah, go ahead, Sibo.
I don't know all of them, but just a few guesses would be hydrogen, nitrogen, helium, and maybe even oxygen.
Okay, so
and carbon.
those, yes, you've got them. You've got them. So those are the 5 ones. A bunch of us have guessed them right. So Deepika, James, Courtney, Esther, silicon is in one of them. Esther got carbon right as well. Akhilesh got all of them right. So the 5 most common elements, exactly what Sibo said. I am really doubting if Sibo has not attended any of my sessions because she's getting all the answers right. The 5 most common elements are hydrogen, helium, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. 5 most abundant elements in the universe. Now, let's take a step back or a step forward, however you want to look at it. And let's leave helium aside. Helium is an inert gas, it does not react. Which are the 4 most common elements that human beings are made up of? So 4 most abundant elements that human bodies are made up of. Anyone would like to take a guess? So we have oxygen, but what else? All right, oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, calcium. Thank you. That's an educated guess. It's not one of the more top 4, but calcium is something we get very often. Akhilesh has also got it right. So it's the same list, guys. It's the same list. So it is by no coincidence that the most abundant elements that make up the universe are the same elements that are found most abundantly in human bodies. The reason why I'm telling you all of this is that human beings are not special. We need to be able to shed the hubris and arrogance that comes by being a part of the species and realize that we're just a coincidence that on one rock floating around in the sky in this vast universe, we ended up being more intelligent than some of the other species. I'm not even saying all of the other species. So if you are of the view that human beings should be able to define environment the way they wish to, because it's all about us, it's reasonable to take a step back and think that the universe is a lot larger than us. We're not even 1% of the rest of the universe, and we are but coincidences that are evident from the fact that we made up of exactly the same elements that are found in abundance in the universe. But for those of you who sort of still on the fence and not convinced, and you still think that human beings should be able to define the environment the way they wish to, I have another exercise for you. And I'm glad that most of our audiences is really into football culturally. So I'm gonna put this to you: soccer, football, whichever. So imagine that this miniature football field that I've put on your screens is an internationally sized football field, soccer field, right? And this point is the Big Bang, right, where it all began. And the horizontal axis, the x-axis, this bit, is the timeline of the universe itself. Now, if this is where the Big Bang happened, and this is today, when do you think human beings came into existence? What was it? On the left penalty box? Was it the midline, where the center forward is, defenders are, the right penalty box, the goal post? When do you think human beings came into existence? All right, so Martin says goal line on the right. Pranay says the same thing. Anyone else? Do we have folks who think that it could be on the penalty box on the right or the left or the midline? What do you guys think? When do you think human beings came into existence? I understand that not all of us are football fanatics, but cricket would have been an even more alien sport to take examples about. Yes, Sibo, please go ahead.
When I think about humans' existence, what we from science, they believe the Earth was formed. I think it's 4 million or 4 billion years ago,
yeah.
And by that logic, that means there was the cases of the dinosaurs, and then now the cases of the humans. I don't think humans have actually been in this universe for a very long time. Okay. And I would actually say that we would be past the midline if I were to
all right.
say humans.
All right, so past the midline towards the right, towards today, right? Yeah, I'm assuming that's more obvious. So we have Tanvi who said right penalty box. Sibo says past the midline towards the right. Martin and Pranay have said closer to the goal post, at the edge of the goal post. So the answer is that if this was Big Bang on the x-axis and this is today, human beings came into existence equivalent to the last blade of grass on this football field. That's how recent we are. Actually, let me correct myself. We came into existence equivalent to the thickness of the last blade of grass, not the width of the last blade of grass, the thickness of the last blade of grass. So typically the width of a blade of grass is about 1/16 of an inch. And width of a blade of grass is 1/16 of an inch. The thickness is a lot smaller. And that's how recent we are. The thickness of the last blade of grass on this timeline. Why am I talking about this when I'm supposed to talk about economics of environmental policy and climate change? The reason is that to start at the very beginning, we must realize that universe, environment, climate has existed for I think, 14 billion years before we came into existence. And much after we have absolutely ruined our planet, it will stay on, right? So in that context, if we are so recent and if we are so insignificant, then to define something that is a lot larger than us, that we barely understand, that has pre-existed and would post-exist us, it is probably not right to define it in a way that it only makes sense for one species, which is human beings. So all of this effort that I undertook over the past half hour was only to explain to you guys that it is okay to challenge even the legal definitions, as long as you have a strong basis to judge it or critique it. And the way I'm critiquing the legal definition of environment is that we have overlooked the most major aspects of environment. Now, that's funnily enough also a very oversimplified answer to the question, why haven't we been able to fix it? Well, to fix something, you first should be able to define it right. We have been defining it all wrong. We've been making it all about human beings when environment is not about human beings, it's about a lot more. But then the obvious question is, why do we define it about human beings? Why is it only about the things that we require to subsist? Why is it only about air, water, land, plants, and other animals, and so on and so forth? The reason is that historically, as a species, we have believed in one approach. So up till now, I've covered the etymological, historical significance of the term environment. Now I'm moving into the socio-ethics of environment, and I'll keep defining what I'm going to cover as we go ahead. The one approach that we have really stood by over the past millennia is this, what we call an anthropocentric approach. Now, I know that all of you know what anthropocentrism is, but it's important to understand how this really works. So anthro, the term, stands for human, human-like, humanoid, and centric means centric. So everything is human-centric in this approach. Everything that has existed outside of human beings is only there for its utilization, exploitation, becoming a resource and being used by us. That's the approach that we have followed as a human species, that it is supposed to be anthropocentric. If it does not concern us, then it can be exploited, right? So think of trees, think of rivers, think of the climate, think of the Amazons, think of the Himalayas, think of all of those wonderful natural resources that we have. The fact that we call them natural resources is emblematic of the fact that we treat them as resources, right? They're there for our utilization, our exploitation. Now, a reasonable question would be, and I'm assuming everyone in this audience is woke enough to call themselves non-anthropocentric, so we care for the environment and climate change and climate action. So in this audience, given the fact that we are woke and we know what's right and what's important and where our priorities lie, and environment should be appreciated for being environment, not because it's a resource for us, then what are your thoughts on hunting? Or what are your thoughts on gaming reserves? Or what are your thoughts on meat eating? What are your thoughts on vegetarianism? Do you think that hunting and eating that animal is anthropocentric in nature? Yes, Courtney, go ahead.
So this is an interesting one. My background, I was an environmental activist in South Africa, and early on in my days, I was so against hunting. I was absolutely against it, you know, animal rights, etc. And then I engaged with an incredible professional who works in the conservation space, and specifically in the South African context, hunting is crucial to our conservation efforts. So I kind of was like, what are you talking about? And he said that the majority of the land that is under conservation at the moment is used for farms that do hunting enterprises for tourists. And if it weren't for those farms, the majority of the land in South Africa would not be under conservation. It would be under commercial use for farming or residential or et cetera, et cetera. And so in the South African case, and I'm assuming perhaps this may relate to other African countries as well, hunting is actually beneficial to conservation. So I thought that was very interesting. And then in the context of the Kruger National Park, a famous national park very close to where I live, hunting is actually essential for keeping the carrying capacity of the park, or keeping the park under its carrying capacity, because the animals breed, and because of the fact that they're in one specific area and they can't migrate as they used to, the area needs to be able to sustain them, and so they have to hunt to keep the population stable. That's just like one aspect of it, and so in this context, obviously.
That's an excellent point, Courtney, and not many people realize this, but you've sort of given us an example to help us understand how in the current scenario, I would not say that would be the case if there were no boundaries and there were no one dominant species, then obviously, there's no requirement to define it such. But carrying capacity as a concept then might require hunting to be allowed or meat eating to be allowed or so on and so forth. So that's one view. Is there any other view about this? Let's see. All right, so Hussein is of a similar view. We have 2 for hunting. Anyone else? All right, so I think the larger consensus would be that anthropocentrism would not include food habits per se, or hunting or gaming or any of those things. And I certainly have an opinion about this, but this isn't about my opinions. This is about, understanding why it is how it is, and how anthropocentrism might not have such well-defined boundaries as Courtney says, that, animal rights and everything, but once you start understanding what carrying capacity is and what natural utilization is, you start sort of making sense of all of these activities as well. But at this time, let me also specify one very minute thing. Now, when we think of ourselves as, environmentalists and people who care about environment generally, we think that we have sort of migrated from anthropocentrism and we have entered the realm of ecocentrism. Now, I'd request all of you to check out the GPODS Fellowship. That's where I go into these social ethics approaches in detail. But we are short in time, so I'm just going to keep it short here. I want all of us to take a bit of a reality check and realize that your carbon footprint today, in the 20 years or 25 years or 16 years of your life, is more than the cumulative carbon footprint of all of your ancestors put together. So while you might be segregating your waste and using non-plastic steel straws and not littering on the streets or any of those things, or not resorting to fast fashion on a bad day, still your carbon footprint is more than the carbon footprint of all of your ancestry put together. And hence, do not be content about your efforts ever, because we need to get on to net zero. Now, that's another topic for another session. But anyway, so that's one of the major social ethics approaches of environment. Some of you might ask that cannot be the case. Some of us must have been ecocentric in our lives, and we must have had some major revolution through which we had undertaken ecocentrism. Well, I have an example for you on that point. But to be able to crack that example, you have to, I'll be telling you a story. And the story has two protagonists. One is the city as a protagonist, believe it or not. The other has the decade as the protagonist. And to make it a little more fun and a little less monologues where I'm just speaking and you guys are listening, I have put hints of who the protagonist is in terms of the city and which decade is the other protagonist of my story in the pictures that I'm going to show to you. So there are hints all over the photos. You have to guess which city this is and which decade this is. So please enter your answers in the chat box starting now. Which city is this and which decade is this? All the hints, all the subtle hints are in the photos. So please write in the chat. I'm back in 30 seconds. You could write in your chat box, which city do you think this is? Which decade do you think this is? I'm back in 30 seconds. All right, let's see. Please scroll up. So Chandi, I like your idea about anthropocentrism. Let's have a larger discussion on this separately because I have very, very concrete views about this. All right, so Courtney says New York, Deepika says London, Suchika says France, Sanjana says France, Martin and Pranay say New York from the 1950s, James says 1940s New York, Esther says New York 1950s, somewhere in America, that's a safe bet, 1950s, Freak, Dust Cloud, USA, 1950s. Okay, so for those of you who guessed the US, United States of America, you're right, but it's not the East Coast. Is that a good enough hint? It's not the East Coast, and it's not the 1950s, though you're close. Courtney, do you want to take a guess? I see your hand is up. California.
Los Angeles, 1970s?
It is LA of the 1970s, absolutely. So, Los Angeles, 1970s, where the folks are from, where the photos are from. The reason why I've put up these photos about LA of the 1970s is this. I'm sure you can, as some of you have already noticed, you can see on your screens severe pollution, smog, smoke and fog, right? You can see it on your screens here in this whole photo. You can see the visibility is really low. And you're right, LA of the late 1960s, early 1970s, the situation was so bad that it is said that on a good day, you could not see beyond 4 or 5 meters. On a bad day, you could not see beyond the other side of the bed. The situation was so bad that you had to wear such masks in public. the situation was so bad that you feared that if you had a child, if you were to conceive a kid, the kid might be born with eczema, emphysema, asthma, skin cancer, skin diseases, lung diseases, bronchitis, bronchial disorders, so many things. That is how bad the pollution was back in the day in LA. So, the people got together and they started raising their voices and they started talking about how environment should be improved and so on and so forth. Akhilesh, you're absolutely on point. But the situation in Delhi these days is pretty similar, and to be honest, it's pretty similar across quite a few cities around the globe. So you take up Beijing and you take up Delhi, a bunch of other cities have similar smog situation today. But anyway, the people got together, they started politicizing the issue, they started talking about how environment should be better, so on and so forth. And lo and behold, we usher ourselves into this golden age of environment. So if you speak to any environmental academic such as myself, we'll tell you that the golden age of environment that we must all celebrate was the 1970s. That's when we started discussing problems like the polluter pays principle. That's when the seeds of sustainable development were sown. That's when the 1972 Stockholm Conference on Human Environment was held. So many things happened, and not just in terms of international relations or policy, even in terms of tech. So catalytic converters that are put in exhaust pipes of your vehicles today, those were mandated during this time. The California Air Task Force was set up. Now the California Air Regulatory Board, but earlier it was called the California Air Task Force. The federal US Clean Air Act was passed, under which the states could have even more stringent environmental standards. The individual states could have even more stringent environmental standards, because of which, if you notice, while the whole world is still at Euro 6, California is using CAFE standards that are about 3 generations ahead of what the rest of the world is using. That's because policy-wise, technology-wise, there were so many innovations that happened in the 1970s. For those of you, all right, a bit of a digression here, but any of you, I know it's not cool to say this out loud apparently, but any of you fans of or have watched The Big Bang Theory, the series, at any point of time? Raise your hands if you watched The Big Bang Theory at any point of time. So we have 2 out of a group of 47. All right, 4. That's more encouraging. I'm not the only one. A few of us have watched The Big Bang Theory. Now, The Big Bang Theory has this running joke in which Sheldon Cooper, the main protagonist, the main guy, one of the main guys, whenever he is being driven around by his neighbor Penny, he keeps telling her that your check engine light is on. Remember, there's this running joke throughout the series for 9, 10, how many ever seasons, that your check engine light is on, and it used to get a big laugh every time. Now, that joke would not have been possible without this golden age of environment, because while the check engine light was invented in Detroit in 1930s, and while it was officially mandated in 1996 in the US, technically it was around the 1970s when check engine light itself was starting to be used. So people became conscious that they need to be conscious of their environment. There was political pressure exerted. We had new policies and new laws and new technology that is bearing fruits in terms of jokes and popular series 40 years later. But that is where we are. So 1970s was this golden age of environment. The question that we need to ask ourselves is, so we're thankful that golden age of environment happened, but why did it happen? The answer is that the golden age of environment in the 1970s happened, yes, because people were more conscious, but people were more conscious about their health. They feared for their health. They feared for the health of their children. They feared for the fact that they might have skin issues and lung issues if the pollution is the way it is. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that it's not just you and I or any other part of our human species habitation, but even the golden age of environment was ushered into because human beings were at the center of it all. So what we celebrate as the most celebrated age of environmentalism, of environmental innovation, tech innovation, policy innovation, all of that happened not because we cared for our environment, not because we were ecocentric, but because we were human-centric. We cared for our lives, our health, that of the people around us, and a small portion of it because we did not really like to wear masks, like the person in this photo, but largely because we were all caring about ourselves. So the most celebrated age of environment has stemmed from anthropocentrism. And that should give you an idea about how we have been as a species, where the most impactful age was an outcome of basic anthropocentrism. All right, so that's one part of the equation. That's about till where I will be discussing the history of social ethics and environment. Let's switch gears now and move into the international relations domain of environment on the same example. So, and guys, again, I invite all of you to check out our website. I'm happy to discuss all of these things that I've discussed today in some detail outside of the session. Always happy to have a conversation about any things that we discussed. So let's say that all of that happened, right? Environmental age happened, and now we know why it happened and what all happened. My question to all of you is, let's say that this person on your screen, this guy who's wearing this mask, let's say that his name is Bob, right? I don't know what his name is. Let's call him Bob. And all of these policy and tech and so many other interventions have happened. And Bob is a rich merchant dealing with fossil fuels back in the 60s. And one day he wakes up and he's told that, listen, you have to spend an X amount of money to get catalytic converters installed in your exhausts of your cars, in your chimneys at home. You have to take these 50 other compliances to carry on your business. These are new environmental compliances that have come about. You have to do X, Y, Z to be environmentally compliant, because this is now an environmentally conscious society and we're in the golden age of environment. So Bob, being a law-abiding citizen, says that, all right, I'll do all of this. And he shells out a lot of money to get those compliances, to get new cars with built-in check engine lights, to get air filters installed and catalytic converters installed and so many other things. While Bob and everyone that you see on your screen in these photos had to spend a lot of money to become environmentally conscious and to clean up the air, the question is, was it Bob and all of these people on your screens who solely made pollution this bad? Were they the only contributors to this smog situation in LA that you see on your screens? And the answer is, let me see, someone's put something in the chat box. No, exactly. So this pollution was caused by generations and generations and generations of pollution, to a point where it reached a tipping point where you could not see anything beyond 5 meters, to a point where you were being born with diseases, right? Where you could not breathe properly. So the ethical question here then is, why should Bob pay for cleanup when he hasn't solely contributed to this state of pollution? Now, believe it or not, this is the question on which is based all of our environmental diplomacy. So every year, whatever happens at Paris or COP26 in Glasgow, or any of the international multilateral agreements in environment, the basic question is, why should Bob of today pay for the pollution caused by, Bob of the 1950s or 1920s? It's just scaled up. So why should the global south, the Bob of today, pay for cleaning up the pollution that was caused 100 years back by the global north? I'm oversimplifying it, but that's the larger question that faces us in environmental diplomacy. So surprisingly, in 1992, the globe, all of the countries sort of came together. We've probably heard about this. Some of us are joining us from Rio, so they have certainly heard about this. In 1992, surprisingly, the global north said that we acknowledge that we polluted, and hence we will, in some way, through transaction of resources, technology and financial resources, we'll try and help all the societies that have been placed under a burden on account of all the exploitation that we've caused, right? This concept is called, in international diplomacy and international law, in international relations, the concept of CBDR, common but differentiated responsibility. It's accounted for in Principle 7 of the Rio Declaration of 1992. And under the CBDR, basically, the world came to an agreement that we have a common responsibility of saving our planet, but we have differentiated responsibilities in terms of the pressures that we have historically put on the society. Okay, so that's basically all the argument that takes place. I'm simplifying it, but majority of the arguments are about, why should I pay? Why you are the one to be blamed? Ethically, it's your responsibility. You polluted for 350 years. Now you're asking me not to pollute. So this concept is basically called the beneficiary pays principle, right? Because you exploited the environment for so long, because you colonized and because you trampled the environment for so long, the fruits that you're bearing in terms of the economic prosperity in your country is an outcome of all of that exploitation. And because you put that burden on global environment for so many years and decades and centuries, today you are a beneficiary for that, of that historic pollution, and hence you should pay to the ones who've not historically exploited our environment or natural resources, either financing or technologies or open resource intellectual property through which they can have a better world for themselves. That's, in a nutshell, what's called the beneficiary pays principle. But, like every principle that's agitated in international relations, even this beneficiary pays principle comes with two sides of the same coin. The one side is called the Communitarian View, and the other side is called the Axiological View. The Communitarian View basically says that if you have benefited from historical pollution, from historical exploitation of natural resources, then on account of all of that exploitation historically, you have gathered way too much money, because of which you have benefited from all of that exploitation, and hence you should pay to the others. The axiological view says that you should not. Let's look at this for a moment. So, as I was saying, the communitarian view basically says that you owe your high standard of living in the global north to the years and centuries of exploitation of natural resources, and hence you should pay to the global south for all of that exploitation that you caused, right? And there are various philosophers who argued in favor of this, or whose theories have been taken up and applied to the communitarian view. So there's Edmund Burke and Eric Neumayer. Currently, I think Professor Neumayer is at LSE, and we have Axel Gosseries. Sorry, that's Axel, not Alex. Axel Gosseries. Let me take up Axel Gosseries' viewpoint. Axel Gosseries says that because your country or your lineage and ancestry polluted for centuries together, you today have better health infrastructure and better education system and more opportunities in terms of jobs, and your society is more equitable and so on and so forth, which makes you, in essence, a free rider. Because the generation of today is reaping all of the benefits from the harm that was caused to the natural resources and environment 2-3 centuries back. And so that makes them a free rider, right? And Axel Gosseries says that no one should be allowed to be a free rider. So those folks should pay in terms of financing, in terms of technology exchange, in terms of open resource, IP and tech, the global south. That's the communitarian view. The other view is the axiological view. Now, axiological view basically says, axiology is the study of morality and values. Axiological view, and we have Dr. Simon Caney here from the University of Oxford, who basically says that that person in the global north had no control over the actions of his state or his ancestors who exploited the environment. And if he had no control over those actions, how can you hold him responsible, right? So if someone has not really contributed to exploiting the environment or polluting the environment, how can you hold them responsible? And that's the whole argument between holding the current generations of the global north responsible versus not holding them responsible. Garma, the other view was the communitarian view, which says that you should hold them accountable. So current generations of the global north should pay the current generations of the global south, either in terms of financing or tech or open resource IP, but they should pay. Actually, Courtney, Courtney, for those of you who are not looking at the chat, says that because it wasn't only in the past, they continue to do it. That's a separate discussion, because one of the papers that I'm working on currently is aiming to redefine global north and global south. Because if global north and global south is on historical emissions, then you're absolutely right. But if you talk about today, 4 of the top 5 polluting countries are from the developing world. So while some of them stand out, and if you talk of per capita terms, that X amount of pollution per person, then certainly they continue to do it. But if you talk about general aggregated pollution, then there are a new set of countries that have come along that don't really belong in the global north. All right, so, but point taken, and I know where you're coming in from. I've given it a lot of thought, and I'm happy to consider explaining my point of view further separately as well. So as I was saying, there are two contradicting views. One which I'm just explaining this to Garima, one which says that you should have to pay, and the other says that you had no control over the historical emissions, and if you could stop it, you probably would have. So how can I hold you liable? Now, as I said, this is environmental diplomacy 101. This is what happens at all the multilateral agreement negotiations and COPs and everything. I want to step aside now and talk about a more philosophical issue. So up till now, we have discussed historical environmental studies. We have studied socio-ethical approaches of environment. We've studied the international relations of environment, and now we're getting into population ethics of it all. So Professor Derek Parfit, P-A-R-F-I-T, I've written the name on the screen, had a very interesting take on a problem called the non-identity problem. And he had taken a very famous example. I'm going to mold it and change it a little so that it's understandable for everyone. But let's say, and this is the non-identity problem, guys. I do not have the luxury of time to discuss this at length, but I'm happy to have a conversation about this separately as well. So under the non-identity problem, this is the example that he took. I'm modifying it a little. I'm changing the age of the person. Say you have a friend who's 16 years old, all right? Let's call her Miss X, okay? Miss X is 16 years old. She's a very good friend of yours. She's been dating someone for the past 3, 4, 5 years. She thinks that she's fallen in love with this person. And in a hypothetical world where it isn't illegal, she wants to marry this person, have his baby, so on and so forth. And you, being a reasonable person, you try and talk Miss X out of it, and you say that, listen, 16 is no age to get married. You have your whole life ahead of you, your whole education, profession, everything. 16 is also no age to bear a child. And it's actually physically, medically not advisable for you to bear a child at this age. But Miss X is very driven, and she's stubborn, so she fights with her family and she fights with her friends, and she goes on and marries this guy, right? Now, as promised by her, within a few months of marriage, she is pregnant on family way. And within the first year of marriage, she has a baby. Now, because of the physical condition and the toll pregnancy takes on a very young woman of 16, the kid that is born with certain challenges, right? And due to that impact, the kid has to suffer for the rest of his life. Okay. So I'm just trying to, yeah. So the kid gets to know of this whole story of how his mother never listened to the good advice that all of you gave, and she went ahead and bore him, and he, because physically she wasn't ready to bear a child, she had to, the kid faced a lot of issues and impacts which he has to face for the rest of his life. So his, the son of Miss X decides to sue Miss X. The son sues her because she had him when she could not physically have him. She wasn't in a medically fit state to have him. She was too young. And due to her actions, an account of being born in that medically unfit state, he's had to suffer for the rest of his life. Now, according to Derek Parfit, under the non-identity problem, the son could not sue the mother. Because while she did wrong to him and while she did not adhere to the good advice that all of you gave her, if it wasn't for her action, that person would never be born. So if she had decided to wait and she had had a child when she was 28, it would have been a different person, right? So according to Derek Parfait, the son cannot hold his mother accountable because if it wasn't for her, he wouldn't have been born and he wouldn't have been a person and he couldn't even have faced the challenges that he's facing or have the luxuries that he had. So that's the principle of non-identity. Now, why I'm discussing this very niche principle of population ethics is because I want all of you to place this in the environmental international relations context, what we just talked about. Say you are a culmination of everything that has happened before you, okay? Let's say that your parents started dating because there was a railway line that ran from your dad's town to your mother's town and they met because of that. And the railway line was constructed after cutting off a forest patch, and that forest patch, the timber that we got from the forest patch went into the construction of the railway, so on and so forth. So you cannot now sue someone for deforesting that forest patch 50 years earlier, because if they had not deforested that forest patch, the railways wouldn't have been built, your parents would have never met, and you wouldn't be born. And that's a very interesting philosophical problem of population ethics and how that applies to environmental international relations or diplomacy generally. All right. So any questions at this point? If they're very specific, I'm happy to address them separately as well. I'll also put in my LinkedIn profile if you guys want to get in touch and ask me questions about any of the things that we've discussed. Any questions? Yes, Sibo, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question about the axiological point of view. So the axiological point of view basically says that we can't hold anyone of this generation or anyone in general over what happened because it's the individual had no control over what happened. But my question is, but looking at the things the individual does now, for example, in terms of like environment now, the standard of living, the identity that this person holds. For example, to say that, I live in the global north, I come from the global north, and this is what the global north has done, or this is what the global north represents. In a way, is that not, can you not say that the fact that you belong to the global north and you can say that, the fact that you are living in this high standard of living and can say that and can yield that, in a way is a decision that you've made or a control that you have taken upon. If you say that, no, I had no control of it, leave the global north. So in a way, can we not hold even the individuals that are saying that they have no control over it, they give them some sort of, responsibility or control?
So that's an excellent point, because what you're saying is that even in the present day, you're just on account of being from the global north, you have a higher carbon footprint and you're causing more emissions into the atmosphere than anyone else from the global south, and hence you could be held responsible. And that's absolutely right, Sibo. The only issue is that beneficiary-based principle is only talking about historical emissions. Now, what you're saying becomes very relevant when you talk about you being the ancestor of someone who lived 50 years down the line or 150 years down the line. So in that case, that person today from the global north should be held responsible. But that's more of a polluter-based principle playing out, not beneficiary-based principle. So these are two different concepts, and I'm happy to discuss those separately as well. Polluter-based principle is a principle under which someone who has just polluted has to pay, right? You can think of it as a version, actually carbon tax as a version of polluter-based principle. So if you have had a carbon footprint of say 10x, then in that case, you have to pay a carbon tax, which would be 10 into the amount of carbon you've put in the atmosphere. That is opposed to the concept of beneficiary-based principle, which is a backward-looking approach, which is when you're discussing the benefits accrued to you on account of generations of pollution that has been caused. So that is an immediate difference that comes to mind. But ethically, you're absolutely right. That argument should fail because if they have a higher carbon footprint today. So so guys, let me take a step back and tell you an example that I usually take when I talk about present day carbon emissions and the inequity that causes. This is actually a part of my third lecture that I deliver at the GPODS Fellowship. And I hope some of you do sign up so that we can discuss this in detail. But one of the major, how do I put this without any context? Okay, let's say that you're talking about sustainable development, you're talking about future generations. Providing for future generations is sort of like hosting a dinner at your place or a party at your place. I know it sounds weird, but let me explain. Let's say that you want to host a party at your place and your partner asks you that, you know, how many pizzas should I order? And the answer, his or her question is absolutely on point, because if you're having people over for dinner or a party, then you need to order enough pizzas or anything else. Now, for you to be able to plan this party perfectly, you should be able to tell him that I want 10 pizzas for the people that are coming over. That number of pizzas would be dependent on the number of people that you have over, right? So if there are 40 people, you'll order pizzas accordingly. If there are 20 people, you'll order pizzas differently. If there are 5 people, you'll order pizzas differently, right? Sustainable development is sort of the same. The key to the whole issue is the future population. So how much do you leave behind of these natural resources? Or how much should you take into account when you're defining for the future generations? And that can only happen when you have an idea through climate modeling, risk assessment, risk modeling, an idea about the number of people you'll have, say, 20 years later. But one of the things that has been floated around in this debate, at least the academic debate, that what if there's an international population policy? So what if we limit the number of offsprings someone can have to 2 or 1? Now, historically, we've seen that it has terrible impacts on the population. There are black markets for kids. Female feticide increases if you have a limit on the number of children one can have. All terrible things that happen because of that. But I'm not going into that. I'm talking about a more ethical argument here. Let's say that somehow, taking everything aside, you have been able to have a global population policy where you've limited the number of offsprings anyone can have to a maximum of 2 offsprings. Okay. Now, say there's a couple in Chittagong in Bangladesh. Okay. Now that couple says that my carbon footprint is 1,000th of the couple staying in Upper West Side, New York City. why should I be put to the same regulation of population policy as that other person? I am 1,000th of their carbon footprint. So the point of this whole argument is that it's very difficult to come up with a policy that can be applied equally globally. And exactly to your point, Sibo, you also have to consider the current emissions, not just the past emissions, to come up with that number. All right, coming back, I'm painfully aware that I have just about 20 minutes left for the session. So let's keep aside all of this theories on morality and social ethics and global north versus global south and all of those things. If, and this is a question for all of you, if it wasn't for the blame game, and if it wasn't for accountability for who has caused the current state, if it wasn't for this whole I shouldn't pay, you should pay, and you're polluting more than I am, and you have polluted more than I have, if it wasn't for all of this, what is the one reason why global north should not pay the global? What is that one thing that's stopping the global north from paying the global south in terms of financing and tech and IP? What's that one issue outside of ethics that stops the developed world from paying the developing world? What do you guys think? The one issue. Greed. All right. What else? So, Courtney, that's basically what I'm looking for as an answer. Let me just go ahead with this because, again, there's paucity of time, so I should. If there's no blame game, no social ethical issue, no historical emissions issue, no current versus past issue, then the one thing that's stopping, very funny, Hussein, the one thing that's stopping the global north from paying the global south is quite literally money, right? There's scarcity of it. If there was plenty of it going around, then global north would not have any issue paying the global south, but the global south would not need that money because there's plenty of it, right? So the one factor that plays out is exactly what Garima says, for economic reasons. Now, to understand the problem of economics of environmental policy, I'm going to take you through a bit of a road less traveled. It'll make sense at the end of the session. So till then, you guys might be a little confused, but I assure you it's going to be fun, and I just request your patience for the next 15, 20 minutes. All right. So can anyone identify at least a couple of these buildings, or can guess the cities that these buildings are from? Anyone? Dubai. One is from the UAE, absolutely. Where else? Yes. All right, so London, Dubai. Okay, that's not the point of this discussion. I'll digress anyway. So let's take these two buildings, okay? This is called the Bullet Building. It's in London. This is called the Walkie-Talkie Building for some reason. Yes, absolutely. So I want all of you to focus on this building on the left. It's called the Walkie-Talkie Building in London. Some people find it very aesthetically pleasing. I'm sort of on the fence. But be that as it may, it was at one point of time the most expensive piece of real estate in the world. All across the globe, it was one of the most expensive pieces of real estate in the world at one point of time. It's located in a posh locality in London. You've probably seen it if you've been to London. Very famous as well, sort of a landmark structure. The point is that I came across this news report a couple of years back in, I think it was CNN, and this is what the news was. So there was a car parked across the street from the Walkie-Talkie building, this building on your left, this one, in a way that a lot of the light reflected off the building was going onto the car. Now, the heat reflected off this glass skyscraper was so much that it partially melted the Jaguar XJ, the car. Now, for any of us who have studied the basics of high school science, we probably know that there's this thing called, or if you are absolutely passionate about gardening like I am, you probably know about this thing called the greenhouse effect, right? The greenhouse effect, if you could raise your hands if you know what the greenhouse effect is. Anyone? All right. Okay. So some of us know what the greenhouse effect is. Great, great, great. I get the point. All of you know, I get it. All right, so the greenhouse effect basically is that you have glass house, and typically in winters, you place all of your plants under this glass house, and what the glass does is it takes in all the heat, but it does not let it escape it, right? So your plants basically have a convenient weather, climate, temperature to grow in, and that's how greenhouse effect works. Now, on your screen, we're talking about a glass building with an obvious greenhouse effect, where the heat reflected off the building was good enough to melt a car. Think about the amount of heat that is captured in this skyscraper of a greenhouse effect. And just a little research on this, and you'll find enough interviews on this aspect as well. So it's a vicious cycle. It's hot outside, you run air conditioning inside. Air conditioning is run on fossil fuel-based energy. Fossil fuel extraction leads to higher carbon emissions. Higher carbon emissions lead to higher warmth in that area. Higher warmth means that you'll have to run higher air conditioning. Higher air conditioning means that you need more energy. More energy means that you have more fossil fuels extracted, more, and so on and so forth. So it's a vicious cycle. So the next time you're appreciating the Manhattan skyline or the Singaporean skyline or the Shanghai skyline, remember what's really happening in this space. So the more basic question then would be that why do we have skyscrapers in the first place? Like, why have this whole problem of glass skyscrapers? Apart from the fact that admittedly I'm a big fan of the Manhattan skyline, but apart from the aesthetics of it, why do we have skyscrapers in the first place? And some of you who've read Yuval Noah Harari already, I don't have to go over this, but scarcity of land versus demand of land. The one thing that people did was they built one house and there was a lot of demand. So they built another house atop another and atop another, atop so on and so forth. And you ended up having a skyscraper. So that's the logic behind why we have skyscrapers and multi-story buildings and so on and so forth. But that's not the point that I'm trying to make here. If you think that you can today construct a skyscraper where your house is, that is not possible. That is not possible because very few people know about this, surprisingly. But globally, you have this thing called a legal concept. I'm sorry that I go back to legal concepts, but I am a lawyer. So you have this concept called the floor area ratio or the floor space index. Does anyone know, raise of hands, if anyone knows what FAR is? All right, Suchika does. Anyone else? What FAR or FSI is? Floor space index or floor area ratio? Okay, so let me just go ahead explaining this. And I'd probably need something to explain this with, but this is going to take 2 minutes, guys, but it'll all become clearer when I explain this. So the height of your building in whichever part of the world you are is dependent upon the FAR in your region or the FSI in your region. And this is globally. It's not just a case in the US. It's not just a case in Delhi. It's across the world. And FAR or FSI, same thing, is decided on the basis of your local planning laws, urban policy, urban development policy, urban infrastructure policy, whatever you may have in your municipal corporation or provincial area. What does FSI mean? FSI means, let's say that this is 1 square meters of land that you own. Okay, this is 1 square meters of land, meter of land that you own. If according to your urban policy, your FSI, floor space index, is 1, then you can have the area of land that you own multiplied by your FSI, that amount of built up area. So if your FSI is 1 and the amount of land that you own is 10 square meters, then you can have 10 square meters worth of built up area or constructed area on that land. Similarly, if your FSI is 2, then if you own 10 square meters of land, you'll have 2 multiplied by 10 square meters of land worth of built up area, 20 square meters that you could have. Now you can choose to have built up area the way you want. So if you have 10 square meters of land and if your FSI is 5 and you can have 50 square meters of built up area, you could have it in a way that it covers all of the land, right? 50 square meters over 50 square meters, 50 square meters over 10 square meters. So you can have 5 stories, or you can have half the land open and you can have 10 stories, or you can have 3/4 of the land open and you can have 40 stories. That's how FSI works. The complication of FSI is not that big an issue here, what I'm trying to cover. If you require help, I have a pictorial representation. You can go back to this in our recordings, or I'm happy to discuss this outside as well. Okay, so this is what makes it very interesting of how, remember, all right, this is what makes it very interesting. And I know that all of you have this question, why am I talking about FSI and FAR in the economics of environmental policy? Bear with me for a minute. Let's take India's example. FSI of most Indian cities is around 3 and 5, 3 to 5, okay? That's the regular average FSI. We'll have a look at this a little later as well, but that's basically in a nutshell the FAR of most Indian cities. I want you to look at Mumbai here, okay? So some of you might know Mumbai is one of the most densely polluted, populated as well, but populated cities in the world. And Mumbai is sort of the only analogy that I can think of to explain to you guys. It's sort of like New York. So you have the Manhattan, you have an island part of New York, and then you have Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens and Astoria around it, right? So you have an island part of Manhattan in New York, and then you have the rest of the New York City around it. Similarly, Mumbai has an island part of Mumbai, which is called South Bombay or Island City of Bombay, and the rest of the Mumbai surrounds it. I want you to focus on this number, 1.33. That's the FAR in the island portion of Mumbai. And I'm not going into the carrying capacity and everything. We do not have the time, but that's the FAR of Mumbai. So 1.33 FAR means that if you have 10 square meters of land, And if your FAI is 1.33, you can have constructed or built up area of 13.3 square meters. I'm simplifying it for our understanding here. But so over 1 square meter of land, you can have 1.3 square meters worth of built up area, right? Now, let's compare Mumbai with other cities around the globe with similar populations. So these are a bunch of Indian cities that I've listed on your screens. Mumbai is here, 1.33, the island part of Bombay. Then you have Hong Kong with an FAR of 12, almost 10 times that of Mumbai. You have Chicago, almost 10 times that of Mumbai. New York is 15. Singapore, I could not even fit on my screen. That's how high the FAR is. All right. And we're talking about cities that have similar populations, cities that have similar, they're known as the financial capitals, so on and so forth. So if we're talking about the floor area index and the height of buildings in Mumbai city, and generally we can estimate what is the population within the city, then I have a couple of questions for you. I'm actually going to throw numbers at you. I do not expect you to know the answers. I'll be very surprised if you're able to guess the answers. But this is a number. 48 square feet and 50 square feet. Would anyone want to guess what could be the significance of any of these numbers? We're talking in terms of Mumbai, we're talking in terms of FSI. Again, I'm taking Mumbai as an example. You could take any city in the world as an example for this exercise, but any guesses as to what 48 square feet would be in the context of what we're talking about? So 48 square feet is the average space available per person in the island part of Mumbai. If any of you are having a hard time visualizing this, a room that's 7 feet by 7 feet in its length and breadth, so just a little over than a regular human, is 49 square feet. So a 7 feet by 7 feet room is 49 square feet. Average space per person available in the island part of Mumbai is 48 square feet. Any guesses as to what 50 square feet is? All right. So while 48 square feet is the average floor space per person in Mumbai, 50 square feet is the average floor space of a prison cell in the US. I just want to draw this distinction for a minute that the federally assigned floor space for every prison cell in the US is 50 square feet. Average floor space per person in the island part of Mumbai is 48 square feet. What happens, basics of economics, what happens when you have a scarcity of supply and almost an infinite demand of that thing? In the case of Mumbai, that's land. So everyone wants to be in the island part of Mumbai. Similarly, everyone wants to be in Manhattan, but there's a limited supply of real estate available. So what happens when you have limited supply and an incredible demand? Yes, Esther?
So in a case where you have scarce supply but a vast demand, you experience a situation where prices go up for that product or service that's being demanded. So in a case where you're talking of the land, the prices of acquiring that land is going to go up in
Absolutely.
places like Mumbai.
Absolutely. And that's what's happening in Manhattan. That's what's happening in Mumbai. That's what's happening in certain parts of wherever we are. So the prices go up, as was stated also by Suchika and James and a bunch of other things. All right. 1 second, guys. Srishti, can you ask Aditi to tell Dr. Ingram that I'll be late by 5 minutes?
We'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me. All right. So as I was saying, guys, completely slipped my mind. It's a compliment to you guys that I lost track of time. I'm enjoying speaking with you guys. So what happens when the prices go up in this context? The price of real estate goes up, right? The rents go up. So when the rents go up, what happens? In the case of Mumbai, people cannot afford those rents, so they settle in slums. Okay. Some of us do not want to stay in slums, so we go to the suburbs and we develop suburbs as we have around New York or London or wherever. So there are slums, and then there is a suburban sprawl. And what happens when you have a suburban sprawl, but you have to get to the center of the city every day? You need transportation, right? Exactly. So not just poverty, Sibo. All three things, slums, suburban sprawl, transportation, have major environmental impacts. And all of this, and I have a bunch of slides prepared for how much environmental impact, but that's not the point here. The point is that a tangentially unrelated policy of urban planning in your local community, something that seems unrelated to environment, has ripple effects across the environmental domain. So you have to bear with air pollution due to the forests being cut down to develop suburbs, due to transportation and the environmental impact transportation has, due to the socio-economic and political and environmental impact that slums have in a lot of our countries around the world. And all of that is happening, at least partially in this case, due to a policy that had absolutely nothing to do with environment. Your FSI, FAR policy, which restricts the length of your buildings or built up area. So guys, that's basically my session for today. I had a bunch of other things that I could have shared with you, but I think we're out of time and I want to respect all of your time as well. I hope you guys had fun and got something to talk about or learn from this session. And I hope the conversations continue about this. Please engage with Yasmin about this. Please engage with me about this. And we're happy to have a conversation about this at any point of time. I also invite all of you to reach out directly to Yasmin, to me, to Srishti, any of us, and we're happy to take this up personally as well if you have any specific pointers to discuss. This is only part one of the session. Let me say that we've saved the best for the last and the better workshops happening tomorrow. That isn't presented by me, so you guys are all in safe hands. And yes, I hope we continue the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eeshan. This has been very, very insightful. You can check all the comments on the chat. It seems like people have really enjoyed it. I'm very, very curious for day 2 tomorrow, and I hope to see everyone then. If you guys can take 2 seconds to perhaps open your camera so we can take a quick picture to register this moment, I think that would be great. So give you guys some time to do that. And what I'll ask you to do is to not type anything in the chat right now so that the chat won't pop up as we are taking the picture. And also, if you can find one emoji under the reactions button that represents how you're leaving the session today, click on that emoji and I'm going to take a picture of us. Okay, so 3, 2, 1. Okay, one more picture. Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for your time. I hope to see you tomorrow. Stay well. Have a great rest of your day or evening, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Rasman. Thank you, Srishti. Thank you for organizing this. Lovely audience, guys. Please.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I've enjoyed.
I'm glad. I'm glad. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.
Welcome.
I don't know. Where can we do the registration from? Is it on the chat area or where?
Hi, Yasin. Thank you so much for all your cooperation, and thank you so much for the attendees to attend this session as well. We hope to see you tomorrow at the same time. So please do keep your links, the Zoom links handy and safe, because we'll be using the same Zoom link for tomorrow's session as well. Thank you so much.